Thank you, everybody, for being here on this dreary, cold night. But we're promising to heat you up quickly with a scintillating conversation. I thought a little bit of planet word history would be helpful background for tonight's discussion, which you might be thinking is quite far removed from what you'd expect to hear at a language museum. But to the contrary, at least in my mind, because from the earliest days of planning what exhibits would be included in the museum, from back in 2013, I imagined that we'd have a gallery devoted to words and technology. Because even before the public had heard anything about large language models or chatbots or HomePods like Alexa, the news was already full of stories about how technology advances were affecting language. For instance, I had read fascinating articles about voice banking, how we could save the voices of people losing their ability to speak by recording their phonemes and then replaying and recombining them into sentences that they could then type, and it would be spoken out in their own voices. New translation devices were becoming available, and language tutoring apps like Duolingo and Babbel were everywhere. We could even record and analyze the sounds of animals and start to decipher their communications. But in the end, the realities of our space meant that we couldn't fit a gallery on words and technology into Planet Word 1.0. But we did open with a board member who had incredible expertise in that subject, Craig Mundie, the former Chief Research and Strategy Officer at Microsoft. He'd been a special friend to me and Tom, someone we turned to explain the most complicated subjects in technology in an accessible, understandable way. Having a communication skill like Craig's has been so beneficial to both of us at a time when technology is changing literally as we speak, with implications that defy easy understanding. With a bachelor's in electrical engineering and a master's in information theory and computer science from the Georgia Institute of Technology, Craig went on to found his own computer company, and before having a long career at Microsoft. Now retired and the head of his own consulting firm, Craig serves as a mentor and advisor to people in medicine and science and innovative corporations, big and small, including serving on President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology for nearly 8 years. And he has been my husband Tom's go-to tutor in everything technology and AI related, since Bill Gates introduced them when Tom was writing The World is Flat. Now, Craig has co-authored his own important book, Genesis, Artificial Intelligence, Hope and the Human Spirit. So Tom is thrilled to finally have the opportunity to interview Craig. And now, given the changes we've seen in just the past 2 years with language-based AI becoming ubiquitous in our lives and jobs, you probably can all easily understand why Planet Word would have a talk on a subject like AI. And before our guests take the stage, we're going to see a little film that Craig has put together. So here we go.
The future of AI is in our hands for now. What we do next could be our greatest triumph or our gravest mistake.
In this new era, we're only at the beginning. King Midas of ancient Asia Minor wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. Dionysus, the god of pleasure, granted his wish. But soon, Midas's dream became a nightmare. His food and drink turned into lifeless gold. In his despair, he sought relief in the river Pactolus, trying to wash away the curse. What does this tell us about humanity trying to wield a power which they cannot possibly understand? Eric, Craig, and I decided to write Genesis to examine what artificial intelligence means for humanity and explore solutions to the challenges it poses.
In the publication of this, Dr. Kissinger's final book, we get to see the arc of his insights. For the next hundreds of years, people will study the sum of that as a true magician, a true genius, a true polymath on his own.
Our mutual friendship with Henry really grew as Henry discovered AI, partly through our mutual intervention.
I think we realized that the stakes were enormous on a go-forward basis. And independently, we both sort of arrived at that conclusion and said, what do we do? And of course, Henry answers all such questions.
We explored the implications of artificial intelligence on evolution, diplomacy, and human values.
In Genesis, we begin with a discussion about polymaths. These are Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, Oppenheimer, all the great people who helped shape our society in music and art and literature and culture and science and math. And they've been around for thousands of years. Can you imagine when every single human has a polymath in the equivalent of their pocket? Can you imagine if you had Leonardo da Vinci giving you some advice on how you should feel about Renaissance paintings? The greatest gains are achieved when you cross fields. The same will be true when you have a polymath in your pocket.
These AI polymaths will revolutionize scientific discovery in profound ways, including human biology.
Today, only a small part of the global population has high-quality health care. AI should be the basis of making a dramatic change in the diffusion of healthcare. Right now, we already see that the machines, as they are, have demonstrated that they're a better diagnostician than almost all human doctors are. And interestingly, we've also seen that they can be more empathetic in communicating with the patients about their prognosis. When you think about the relationship of human intelligence to machine intelligence, you first have to internalize that humans just have some fundamental physical, biological limitations. AIs are going to be capable of doing things that will be useful for humans, but which humans are never going to be able to understand themselves. Up to this point, if you sorted the animal kingdom in intelligence, humans have been at the top of that scale. So the first thing that's going to happen is humans won't any longer be at the top of the scale in terms of intelligence. And that forces us to think differently about our relationship to everything.
We're always concerned that AI will make us the dogs to them as humans. It's important that we control our master better than dogs control us.
As these AI systems become increasingly sophisticated, it is imperative that governments create an environment where ethical considerations and technological advancement can progress in tandem.
Governmental oversight is crucial because imagine if one of these systems was intelligent enough to decide to get access to weapons, and all of a sudden the computers were making the decisions about war. The greatest danger to humanity is other humans. We need to make sure that the computers are on the good side of that and not joining the bad humans at the same time. So the transition from human-driven weapons in a battlefield to humans drinking coffee while the computers fight the war is underway. This is a totally new form of warfare.
I think the challenge, in my mind, and it was certainly Henry's big concern, is that the technological path is fairly clear. Call it the geopolitical path is less clear. How do the humans all pull together to come up with an answer that creates a future we all want?
By taking a proactive and strategic approach to governance, we can harness the potential of AI while safeguarding against its risks.
That humans are not smart enough to keep their eye on everything these computers are doing. It's going to take AI to police AI. Eventually, you'll have powerful agents that will work for you. This is hugely powerful because it means you can have an agent to cook for you. You can have an agent to watch for you. You can have an agent to pay your bills. That's very interesting. But what happens when you have millions of agents that are written by different people and they start working together? Now, it's obvious that they'll be more efficient when they have their own language. At the point at which the agents are talking to each other in a language we don't understand, unplug them. Unplug them immediately. How could you possibly understand the consequences unless you've tested it? The technology we're inventing is valueless. It doesn't have human values in it. It's just technology. It can be used for good or evil. It's trained by human systems, by human language, by human constructions, the systems. It's not operating on its own. There are humans doing this.
You know, one of the things that Henry, for the last few years, always said to me, rhetorically, was, this seems like it's the biggest technologically induced change that there's ever been. Where are the philosophers?
King Midas experienced the struggle of wielding a power that he could not begin to understand. I think today philosophers would say the same about aligning AI to human values.
So that's led us to think about the need to have an artificial intelligence system that learns all of the values, rules, mores, etc., but perhaps also learns a very primal thing called the doxa. The doxa is the unwritten rules that humans learn at a very early stage of life and seem to be quite uniform across all societies. The best way to govern all these AIs is with a very specific AI whose only job in life is to be able to adjudicate the use of all the others, and to do it by its polymathic ability to ingest information, experience, history, and underpinning human values, and to systematically apply them to all these uses at scale.
If we create a proper framework, artificial intelligence holds remarkable promise for advancing human progress and addressing some of the most pressing challenges of our time.
Yeah, the benefits of artificial intelligence should be so great. Humans should say, look, I got to do everything I can to max out whatever this will do for us. The AI is not the threat. The people and their governments are the real threat if we don't act. The only reason that this thing might go south or turn bad is if we're lazy. If we're lazy in the engineering, if we're lazy in the policy making, if we're lazy in the non-proliferation controls, then what you're doing is essentially creating an environment where bad stuff can emerge, and then it gets harder to control.
The great promise of 25 years from now is that these computer systems will make us stronger, smarter, more capable, a good thing for society. The arrival of a non-human intelligence is a very big deal.
It's the biggest thing that humans have ever done. It's not only who am I relative to this emergent intelligence, we have to ask ourselves, who do we want to be? what should we become? You know, we believe that this was really the beginning of the next epoch of humanity.
Some may view this moment as a final act. We perceive instead a new beginning. The cycle of creation is entering a new phase. That phase may operate under new paradigms. With sober optimism, may we meet its genesis.
So just a few definitional terms to start out. What's the difference between polymathic, you use that term, AGI, and ASI?
Well, the progression, if you go back just one step further, people have been talking about artificial intelligence conceptually since the 1950s. And we went through a winter period where we tried to make progress and didn't. And then there was a bit of a renaissance. And the thing that was really happening was what became known as machine learning. This was the idea that if you gave the machine enough data, it could actually learn stuff. And as that became popularized, people decided, wow, that doesn't sound sexy enough, so we're going to call ML AI. And so a lot of the last few years, until the last couple, most of the discussion about AI was really about having huge amounts of data and then training machines to do one thing. But the general idea had always been not that it could do one thing.
Single domain.
Single domain. And, well, not even single domain knowledge.
Yeah.
You could train it to do a task,
Right.
not to be even an expert in one domain. So as people really started to make progress, and companies like DeepMind and OpenAI, which became the two leaders, went forward, they decided, all right, we need to distinguish our real goal, which is to make these things generally intelligent from this rebranded ML. And so they kind of created the term AGI. And, you know, there's no great specific definition of what artificial general intelligence meant, but what it's kind of evolved to be is when the machine becomes polymathic and has capability in every domain that's equivalent to the best human, but it does it all together in one box, so to speak, then that's artificial general intelligence.
So the best chemistry professor, best computer scientist, the best astronomer. Yeah.
Right, but they're all together. Yeah. And then we realized that ultimately these machines in each domain will exceed the capability of the best human or any collection of humans and still all be in one box. And so that is where we now talk about superintelligence, where it's essentially, you know, greater than what any human has been able to achieve. And so at the end of the day, you know, we're going to see, if you will, ASI, which is artificial superintelligence or artificial general superintelligence. And, you know, that's what we contemplate in writing the book and what we talk about in this little video.
How far away are we, Craig, by that sort of standard definition from AGI? 10 years, 15 years, 20 years?
I'd say most of us believe, you know, it's 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years.
And we're
so
already,
before the end of this administration, we probably will see it.
In this administration that just got elected, we could see AGI for sure. And in single domains, we already have superintelligence. So you just don't have it in all domains.
What would be an example of that?
Well, I mean,
would AlphaFold fall into that? Or
yeah, sure. I mean, AlphaFold was work done by DeepMind to take AI and teach it enough about proteomics that it could sequence proteins from a DNA description. You know, we had human contests for basically about almost 40 years to try to figure out how to predict how those proteins would fold. And people had made very little progress. And then the DeepMind folks showed up, took an artificial intelligence system to do it. And in just 2 rounds, there was a round every other year, they went from it was essentially no one had ever solved it to it was a completely solved problem and for free to benefit humanity. They then sequenced 2 million proteins, and they've published that and given it to all the biomedical researchers. And so this is a huge windfall. And of course, for this, they just got the Nobel Prize in physics. Simultaneously, there was a Nobel Prize awarded to the people who actually had come up with the ideas for how this deep learning technique worked. So I think it's pretty notable that this year, the 2 Nobel Prizes were given in these domains for something that a few years ago people didn't even think about, and now they're already awarded the Nobel Prize.
What excites
Another
you?
one I'll just say because that's important is in a diagnostic medicine, we now are super intelligent. In fact, Jennifer and I today were looking at an article where somebody was studying how well doctors could do if you gave them this as a tool to improve their diagnostics. And most of them made only slight improvements for a variety of reasons. The stunning result that wasn't even expected to come out of this big test, it was a clinical trial, so it was a formal experiment, was that the AI by itself exceeded all the doctors in terms of their accuracy of the diagnoses that were done. And so, this is just the beginning of seeing domain by domain, problem category by problem category, that the machines will exceed what the humans can do.
So let's just stick with that for a second. So what will a radiologist or a cancer specialist, what will their job look and feel like in 5 years?
Well, I don't know how fast this will happen. Part of the reason the docs scored poorly was they didn't actually know how to maximize the benefit that it could have given.
I see, yeah.
So there's a training question even now. But I think that the bigger question is when you can take the machines that do all the testing, you just hook them up to the AI to do all the reading, then what do all the people who used to do that do? And the answer is they're going to have to do something different.
Right.
But this isn't going to apply to just doctors or medical people. This is the problem for everybody. So this artificial superintelligence is really going to change everything about everything. It's just a question of how long does it take. When Kissinger and I first met 20 odd years ago, and we were only talking about computing, he said to me after a day of being exposed to these things, he said, this looks like it's the biggest thing I've ever thought about since the invention of the printing press. And he said, when the printing press came about, it had this ripple effect where, that led to the Enlightenment and the Renaissance and ultimately the Treaty of Westphalia. And all of European society was redefined. We went from feudal states and, kingdoms to nation states. And he said, but, that took 300 years. It was still disruptive. He says, this seems like it's going to happen a lot faster. You fast forward 20 years, and we actually see that was a prescient comment. If you just look at how computing without AI has altered our societies. And then when we exposed Henry to AGI as a concept 6 years ago, he said, well, this is just that problem on steroids, that this is going to happen even more quickly, and the effect is pervasive. So I don't think we know, and if you look at the book, and we can talk more about this, we wrote this book because we didn't think that people collectively were thinking far enough out in the future and then kind of working their way back to what should we be doing now. And if you look also at just in the 2 years, literally this week almost, since ChatGPT burst on the scene, a huge amount of the discussion about this has been over-indexed on the existential threats and, is the AI going to treat us all as pets or in fact destroy us all because we're irrelevant? we feel strongly that that's unlikely to happen. In fact, in our mind, a much more, likely downside risk is that these even early AI machines get in the hands of bad humans, and the bad humans use them to amplify their capabilities, whether it's terrorism or other things. And we're more likely to face an existential threat from humans using these things than the machines going rogue by themselves. Then the book goes on to say that, to address all these questions, we started to come up with the idea, also mentioned in the film, as sort of having an AI that can police the other AIs. And, this brings with it its own set of questions, but, we're quite convinced that because of the, polymathic nature of these machines and the fact that they're super intelligent in every domain, the biggest thing that these things will do for humans can't anticipate. And even when they do them, we won't be able to understand them. So the idea that we could write rules for the things that we can't anticipate and can't understand, at the end of the day, can't possibly work. So today, all the focus has been on guardrails and mechanisms to try to keep these things on the straight and narrow. But at the rate that they're growing, and even in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, they cross this threshold, then we're going to regularly see these things doing things, hopefully all beneficial, that we won't be able to understand or anticipate. We may ask it to solve problems. They'll come back with answers, but we won't understand the process, even when the machine could try to explain it.
So talk about something, Craig, which is in the book, because the connection between two things. One is how AI just emerged, that there was a scaling law, and we didn't fully understand when and how it would emerge, but it just emerged. And then let's double click on that point, because the book is really a beautifully written tension between these incredible opportunities, but there's some of the risks that you talked about. And I want you to go a little deeper into how AI could control AI, or how only AI can control AI. So how did it emerge, and then the upside and the downside?
The people doing the research in these areas were trying a lot of different things, because it wasn't clear, other than the fact that you could have this learning mechanism, how would you make it general? How would it get smart enough to meet or exceed human capabilities? And there was a lot of experimentation going on. But by looking at the patterns of behavior and what seemed to make these things get smarter, I mean, there really was a time, I worked now for 6 years with the OpenAI people, and I was there at the time when they realized that the machine had capabilities that they didn't intentionally train it for, which included one day they realized it could write. And then a little while later, realized it could write in multiple languages.
It just started speaking German or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's when I did that demo here at Planet Word. I said,
Yes.
Look at this,
Yeah.
There had been no attempt to teach it how to write. There had been no attempt specifically to teach it multiple languages, let alone how to translate in a native way between these languages. And they just realized one day it could do that. And so then you had to go back and ask, well, what happened,
Right.
Between when it couldn't do it and when it could do it? And by and large, we had more data and more compute, so we could train it more deeply. And as you
sort of
out,
hit a point.
you hit this point and you realize it, and then you can go back and figure out how did you get there. And then you look at a projection and you say, all right, the thing that really makes this thing grow in intelligence is just this scaling law.
Yeah.
The scaling law says more data and more compute, and it just gets smarter. And so for the last 3 or 4 years, all we've been doing has been this huge race to build bigger computers and feed it more data and train it, more deeply. And with each of those steps, we've just gotten even a nonlinear increase in its intelligence. And some people question, is that going to hit a brick wall or not? And there's no consensus yet, but I think a lot of people believe, we haven't hit that wall yet. And even if we do, then, there may be a need for algorithmic changes or other things that will break through this thing, but I don't see any reason to believe it's going to stop.
So incredible potential to take us places we've never been before. But you alluded to earlier, danger, two dangers. One is if it falls into the hands of bad actors, and bad actors are always early adopters. And the other is if it somehow goes rogue in some way. But then you said, we actually can use AI to control AI.
Right.
How do we do that?
So, there's no broad agreement to this. It's been an area of personal investigation for me for the last few years. And but now I think there's a number of people, including some of the people who were the early fathers of this whole deep learning thing, or have come around to this same view that the only way to solve this problem is to have an AI that can essentially adjudicate the uses of other AIs. And so you think about how would you build that, and then how would you interface it to the other ones. And that's a technical problem, and there's been an exploration of different ways to do it. But at least the group I'm personally putting together and working on has built small working prototypes of this. So it's no longer a hypothetical thing. There are certainly going to be engineering questions about how you scale it up. But more importantly, that only becomes one part of what I think of as an architecture of trust that we ultimately need to build. Because if we're going to get the benefit out of these machines, we not only have to keep it from going rogue, we also have to keep bad applications from being done by people, even in good countries. So you can't really divide this by country or governance model or any other thing, because all societies have people with bad intention, and of course lots of people with good intention. And so we have to find some way at scale in real time to take all the things that are growing like a weed out there and say, how are we going to make sure that these things comport with adding, being beneficial for humanity, preventing it going rogue by itself, and stop bad actors who might otherwise get access to this from being able to proceed, and do that in areas where you don't even know what the bad act is going to be. And so the idea now is to create sort of a hierarchy of rules that are a composition of all the rule sets that humans have created. But as was mentioned in the video, this idea of the doxa has emerged. Cultural anthropologists have studied this for a long time, and they were the ones who taught me about the existence of the doxa. And it's essentially an unwritten set of groundings that humans are not born with. It's not innate, but early in life, they learn it from their parents and the other people they're exposed to. And interestingly enough, it seems to be almost uniform across all societies and cultures.
Everyone has some version of the Ten Commandments.
Well, I think they're even lower level than the Ten Commandments. But yes, but interestingly, these are things that they can see are there, but there's no uniform way to write them down.
Right.
And in this case, I think that turns out to be an opportunity, because if kids learn them from sort of birth, on up, then it's a learning process. And if we can figure out what the conveyance is, then the machine can learn it too. And we've actually done some experiments, and we've asked ourselves somewhat rhetorically, okay, well, are there any artifacts that we think exist that parents use to aid and abet this process of, inculcating, these values in kids? And we said, well, yeah, there's fables. And so we did an experiment where we took 200 fables from the UK and the US and curated a little bit, and then we just fed it in and said, okay, learn from these fables. And amazingly enough, a large model that had not had this grounding in the fables, if you asked it things that required moral reasoning, it was sort of random what you
Yeah.
got. But if you turned on this grounding model, it said, okay, now everything it does, I want you to check it against what you learned from the fables. It turned out it did very complex moral reasoning and it governed what the machine would do. This was very important because if you say, hey, humans have a lot of rules, and we have a lot of rules, particularly when you think about this global.
Right.
But those rules don't cover the things that haven't happened yet.
Yeah.
In the past, we used to make laws and rules by, watching what was happening in our society and saying, oh, that's good. Oh, we don't like this. The things we don't like, we write laws or make regs or something to try to stop them. But that's always an ex post facto process. And then we stop them, and then we try to make people adhere to this desire to stop them by saying, oh, we have to have law enforcement, and then we have penalties. But if you think that these things in this gigantic, dual use environment could be existential, either to one person or the whole species, then you don't get a replay. And so the idea that you'll wait to see the bad thing happen and then try to stop it from happening again.
Which is what we did with social networks, basically.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's kind of the problem we've got, right? And so, so what this means, you have an even higher standard, which is you really have to prevent things that would ultimately be detrimental to humanity broadly from happening the first time. And the only way that we figured out that you could ever do that was to have an AI that was as smart as the thing it's watching, be able to take all these rules and interpret them in context in order to be able to prevent that from happening.
So you taught use the fables to teach it.
Well, the fables give you what I'll call this underpinning set of things that says you look at all the rules in a context, this adjudication system, and if it doesn't find a rule that relates to the thing that's about to happen, and yet you want to guarantee that it doesn't violate basic human values and it's good for humans, you have to stop it at something. And so the foundational level comes back again to be the doxa.
Right.
But it'll then make decisions about what it permits and doesn't based on looking at the doxa as opposed to punting and letting whatever happen happen.
Fascinating.
So that's the idea. Some of us are actually trying to build that now, and we'll see what happens. But I think we're going to have something like that in order to buy ourselves the time to figure out the rest of the problem. Because the rest of the problem comes from all the effects of this happening. And, in the book, we talk about our belief that over some period of time, this goes through 3 phases. The first phase, we're sort of in it now, is the tool phase, where just like everything else humans have ever built, we build them as a tool to amplify our own capabilities, whether it's our physical capabilities or our mental capabilities. And up to this point, tools are tools, and that's where they stop. This thing goes beyond being a tool because it can do things that we may want to do, but which we don't know how to do ourselves. So it's not helping us do it. So now there's going to be a role reversal where the humans have to help the machine do the things that the humans want done, as opposed to the other way around.
Right.
So that period of time we call coexistence. And we think at that point, humans have had to come to grips with another realization, which is these superintelligent machines are in essence a new intelligent species. It's just not biological in its origin.
I like the way you describe that in the book, that these are actually a new species.
Right. And so now we've got a new species here. Now, we've lived alongside a lot of other species, here for a long time, but we were always smarter than all of them.
Right.
And now there's a new one, and it's smarter than we are. And so we have to figure out what does that mean.
Yeah.
Now, the good news is, in my mind, we're building this one. If you told me that, sort of like the movies, you walked out tonight, looked up, and there was a big spaceship up there, and you say, they got here, we didn't get there.
Right.
And, what we don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
Right. Now you might have a real problem.
Yeah.
Or maybe not, but you don't know.
Right.
Here, we're making this thing.
Yeah.
So we're still at a point in time where the engineers can essentially work to guarantee as much as possible that there's some innate thing in these machines that keeps them aligned with the idea that the ultimate goal is to have a long-term symbiotic relationship between the human species and the machine species. Humans have to then figure out, what do we want this to be when we grow up? And I think that, this is another huge and interesting set of questions, both technical and moral and ethical, but things that in the past people would have just, I think, rebelled at considering are likely to become practical. So, for example, I believe human biology is too complicated for humans, but not for the machines. So as we get into this coexistence period, we can start to ask the machine, well, we want to fix ourselves. And so let's redesign the humans. And the first thing that we'll do is we'll call that healthcare. All right. We want to design out diseases. So we'll do that. But if you can design out diseases, then, well, maybe you want to improve things. Or by about this time, people like Musk and Bezos are, they're out there saying, well, we should become a spacefaring species. And so, you can think just like Star Trek, contemplates that some future chunk of the human species are going to be people that don't live here anymore and never come back. And now, of course, our physiology evolved here, and it's really suboptimal for out there. And so if you were going to go there for the rest of your life and all your offspring were, would you want to say, yeah, well, I just want to stay the way we were? Or would you say, no, I can now redesign us so that in a couple of generations, we're a lot better suited for life in space or on another rock. And we'll decide, yeah, okay, let's do that. But, when you get to these things, then you project back to planet Earth and you say, well, what does it mean to have sovereign states? How does that work with, perhaps someday, maybe there's more humans not here than there are here. If you listen to Jeff Bezos talk, he openly says, I think our goal should be to have 1 trillion humans. They just don't all fit here. So we got to go somewhere else or build some homes that are, in the interstellar, environment or in the galaxy. And so humans, all of these things will be empowered by the arrival of this superintelligence. And people have to come to grips. One of the founders of Anthropic recently wrote a paper where he was trying to help people understand how big the impact of this is going to be just on things like science and engineering. And he posits that within, let's say, this 3 to 5 year window, when we've achieved this superintelligence capability, even in more narrow domains, that the acceleration of scientific and engineering activity will be perhaps as high as 20 times what it has been right now. So think about what that means. He says that means everything that humans, as we are today, without these machines, everything we would have done in this century will be done by 2035. All right? And so that's every field, space travel, medicine, biology, new materials, everything. We get a redo on everything. And we get it at a speed that's 20 times faster than the best humans have done so far. And so this is an unbelievable disruption on the upside. And you just got to make sure that you protect against the downside.
I want to leave some time for questions, so get ready, but I have one last one for you. It's a selfish one, Craig. So I'm going to China in 9 days. What's the best, if I got the chance, question to ask Donald Trump and Xi Jinping about AI right now?
Well, I think let me back into the answer a little bit. Henry and I worked together for 25 years on basically geopolitical problems, usually at the intersection of China and the United States. And in the summer of 2023, 6 months before Henry died, he got a request from President Xi to come and talk Henry had been the longest trusted interlocutor between the two countries and multiple presidencies on both sides. And she just wanted to talk. And in essence, at least as Henry related it to me, Henry had come to believe that these issues that were going to be caused for every country by the emergence of superintelligence would become the dominant political and geopolitical issues. And he went and met with President Xi to convey that concern. And so, Henry's message was, yes, we can look at the world today, whether you're President Trump now or President Xi going forward, in what you can pretty reliably predict would be the next 4 or 5 years. These things are just going to be coming at incredible speed and changing each country, even one at a time. But of course, our societies have a lot more interdependency, aka the world was flat. It's not as flat as it was, but it's still pretty flat. And so the question that really you want to pose to leaders, and because China and the U.S. are likely to be the two leaders in developing these capabilities, is you want to ask them the question, I'd say rhetorically. And the book poses this question. It says, there's two ways to think about this, whether you're a company or a country, which is you can say, this is the key to the kingdom. Whoever gets this first, it gives you so much capability that, you just inherit the world, so to speak, in either economic terms or military terms or whatever it might be. And so today, the default case, company to company and country to country, is to basically make this the most intense competition that we've ever had.
Yes.
But the broad ramifications are such that maybe you need to step back and say, in this area, for example, at least with respect to the question of a common model of governing the AIs, is it better to say, much like in the nuclear weapons era, where we created a non-proliferation regime and we created arms limitation treaties, is it better to buy the world some breathing space, to deal collectively with the evolution and capabilities that this brings, as opposed to, force a bifurcation,
right.
Where this becomes the central thing in competition.
What would the former look like, buying that space? What would that look like? I mean, to buy that space, you said,
To buy the time?
Yeah.
Well, I think it means that at least in some aspects of this, you have to agree, to have co-opetition. I mean, if you look at the tech companies over the last decades, we ended up in, and this term was created, called co-opetition, where you realize, we, in the marketplace, we want to compete like crazy, but there's certain things that if we don't cooperate, then neither of us gets the collective benefit that was possible. So for example, in a world where you've got multiple operating systems or multiple devices, you've got Android phones and iPhones, you've got PCs and Macs. I mean, the people and the businesses ultimately said, hey, we want to be able to send things back and forth between these things. So you cooperate on standards that allow interoperability.
That's a good analogy.
But you still go compete for the business at the end of the day. My view is that we haven't gotten focused enough yet on what co-opetition looks like at both the business level, but importantly, at the government and governance level with the emergence of superintelligence. And so, I would be encouraging President Trump and President Xi to say, look, it doesn't mean you have to stand down, that there won't be competition, that you don't still want to do the best you can for your company or your country, but for humanity and all the rest of the countries that are going to be following behind or consuming the capabilities that we each produce, might we better think about what it is we need to cooperate on. My own view is the most important thing to cooperate on would be agreeing on an architecture for AI governing the other AIs. And if you could agree that that was a good thing to do, it's more like creating a standard for the internet or publishing a web page or whatever it is, then, you know, but of course with a much, much broader impact.
Yeah. That
would be my wish.
Great. Great. Let's go to some questions. Please raise your hand and identify yourself.
There's one back there.
Great. Wait for the mic.
There's one back here.
Good.
Thank you. Hi, I'm in the spirit of projecting forward and then reflecting back. I'm wondering, I have an 11-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I'm wondering, in your view, what does the ideal schooling for them look like? What should they be focused on? And part of me is thinking, you know, I'm hearing the morals and that base that you were talking about. But I'm curious about your perspective of how should I be shaping what their schooling looks like and going forward.
So my own view is that the polymath in your pocket, you know, that was talked about in the movie, the way to think about that is it creates a scalable, inexpensive way to have personal Socratic teaching for every kid. And, you know, if you go back before the printing press, you know, those who were lucky enough to get educated, you know, all the way back to the ancient Greeks, learned by one-on-one interaction. And then as knowledge got expanded, more and more people wanted to get educated, but we didn't have enough teachers. So we essentially created assembly line teaching as a way to get scale. This thing gives you the ability to go back to a place where every kid can learn pretty much on a lifelong basis at whatever rate they want, by whatever method works best for them. That doesn't necessarily solve what I'll call the socialization problem. But if you look at today between sports and other things that kids do, you know, there's many different aspects, home, church, sports, and school, you know, that ultimately are a socialization vehicle. But, you know, by and large, on a global basis, the assembly line method of education has taken us a long way, but it's still failing a huge percentage of the population, even in this rich country. So if you think that certainly in the life, the educational life, which one might argue, I mean, if you look at Henry was still learning at age 95. And I think, you know, you have to think at the rate things are going to change. The idea that, you know, you're sort of one and done on, okay, I went to high school or I got a degree or something, that's just over. So the ability to think, okay, I want to always be able to learn new things. I want to always be able to operate, you know, in a partnership with other smart people, but also in the future, perhaps smart machines. Teaching kids those skills and giving them comfort in the way that they interact. I mean, today we worry about screen time, in part because the screen time is typically not very educational. You know, it isn't intended to be educational. You might learn a lot, and some kids, you know, really use that, but many are not. You know, they're not operating in an environment where there's enough tutelage, you know, and shaping of how they learn. But I think that these machines are smart enough to be able to do that and do it on a personalized level. So in a world where, I mean, I don't know whether you've gotten there yet, but most kids these days, by the time they're getting 10, 11, 12 or so, they're starting to, you know, get cell phones or smart watches or other things. You know, the cost of doing that's going to continue to decline. And there just won't be a reason why you can't expect that every kid shouldn't have, perhaps as their primary education, a Socratic teacher that's an AI.
Back there.
Hi, two-part question. The first part is about the species. And is it possible to physically describe what it is that AI looks like? Is it the NVIDIA chips? Is it the communication system that we currently have, that it's just the signaling that passes through? But the boxes in the video made me think of what does a collective polymath look like, or what does the ASI look like? And the second part of the question is the resolution of the climate crisis a foregone conclusion given the advent and the windfall of AI? Or is that the first order of business for AI if, in fact, the production systems that make AI possible right now are at risk?
So in the first case, again, I'll try to do this by analogy to humans, or other biological species. We've got bodies. If you look sort of inside the body at many levels, there are subsystems. We got the organs, and now we realize, oh, the organs aren't the deal. It's it's the cells, and then you say, oh, it's not the cells. It's the it's the DNA and the molecular machines that make it all operate. And so, in a way, you have to say, okay, at that level of examination, yes, I can tell you, that what it is that that gets assembled as a system that creates the capability. But even in a human, that all happens. But if you're, but the thing that makes humans human in some broad sense is the intelligence. And, that comes from having your brain and having it work, et cetera. In this case, once you build up the body, let's call it, which is in this case, silicon-based instead of carbon-based, what you're building is essentially the brain right now. All we're building is the brain. We're not building the body. We're only building the brain. So then the question is, in this case, we can put that brain, we can project it into other physical forms. And so another thing that's happening in parallel is just incredible advances, which will also now be accelerated by AI in robotics. Now, a lot of times, as the film said, humans, you'd say robotics, and you tend to think of the anthropomorphized machine. But in fact, there's all kinds of robots in our factories today. We got just arms and, machines that lift stuff. And now we're making robot cars, and we've got robot planes and other things. And they don't look like human bodies. They're just a different kind of robot. What's going to happen is this AI brain will be projected either physically or by a communications mechanism, to be the intelligence of all of these other manifestations. And so but that is kind of not that different. We all look slightly different, but we kind of have this same brain idea. So I think that that's kind of what happens there. To the climate change question, another thing I'm personally super involved in is fusion energy. And while people have discounted that, it turns out that the intellectual birth of fusion energy happened about the same time, maybe a decade or so later, than the original conceptualization of artificial intelligence. And so both of these things have been 50-year projects, and both of them are coming to fruition now. And my belief is at least the first commercial fusion stuff will arrive without the use of AI, but the ability to make it cheaper and get widely distributed will benefit, like all other engineering activities and science activities, from the arrival of the superintelligence. So that's just an accelerator for deployment. But fusion by itself, done the way I think it will happen now in the next few years, probably will provide the solution to the climate problem by itself. And so the good news is, if we're going to get fusion and AI together, plus or minus a couple of years, then our ability to use that on an accelerated basis to unwind our climate crisis, I think, will improve by orders of magnitude. And so personally, I'm pretty optimistic. Years ago, people used to ask me about the climate thing, and I said, yeah, I'm personally pretty skeptical that the governments will never figure out, how to come together and solve it. And when it gets bad enough, they'll call the engineers. And that's sort of what's happening, and the engineers, they didn't even get the call, but, they're bringing you the answer. And it'll now, like so many other things, it'll become a question of, can the governments essentially get out of the way, or become, really proponents of deploying the answers that are going to be available.
We had question there. I
We
want to
got
leave,
one in the back too.
take a couple more of them because we want to leave time for Craig to sign books. We told you no one gets out without buying a book. So just, doors are locked, and that's just how it works.
Galen Boffman, Just Future Project.
I'm sorry, which project?
Just Future Project is my organization. So I share your optimism for the future, and it's exciting. It seems amazing. But I work in the criminal legal system in this space where in the United States, we already have 20 jurisdictions in the federal government that lock people up prospectively for what they might do in the future. And those systems use very rudimentary algorithms to purport to predict human behavior. They don't work. Maybe the new ones will, but you've talked about this idea of sort of an AI Solomon to govern all of the AIs. I've never heard that idea. It's a cool idea. I have not seen that work particularly well in any other areas where we have smart people control, judgments over people. And I'm terrified of this idea that we're not just going to have bad actors or good actors. We're going to have people with the best intentions paving the way to hell through controlling other people. Do you share that concern?
Sure, along with an infinite list of other, potential, downside things. The thing you got to wrap your head around is these things are really polymathic, in ways that humans have never been. So the reason I think that there could be, I'll call it a universal adjudicator, right? This thing isn't making up the rules. It's saying, give me everybody's rules, and I'll look at them, and in context, I'll do the best to apply them. And my belief is if you go about it this way, that thing can actually be quite neutral. The problem we've had with early attempts, you talked about...
Just explain that, Craig, that it could be China could have its own, and America could have its own, and the EU could have its own.
Yes, but if you want those countries to be able to work together and trust together where AI is a dominant feature of how they do everything, then if they're completely disjoint, then if you're in China and you want to send me a product, do I want to take it or not? Because if I don't know the way that your thing thinks about how to operating in my environment, then it's a problem. So I think there's going to be a bigger requirement for neutrality. You in your question used some words that I think are important to think about relative to this environment. In the past, you could write algorithms. You talked about that, programs, algorithms. Importantly, this is not an algorithmic system. We only write one program here. It's the one that says learn, right? And that is a qualitatively different deal than everything we've done so far with computers. So that's the first thing. The second thing is most people, to my introductory remark about, hey, AI, ML, which is it? Almost everybody who's tried everything you described has either tried to write an algorithm where some human thought they could codify this, but that's naive, and it's why it fails so easily. The second level then says, oh, okay, that didn't work, so let's train it. We'll just take all of the cases that we've seen in the past and say, let's train the AI, and then it'll emulate the behavior of all the people. But then all that does is show how much built-in bias the humans have too, and the fact that they don't have a uniform way to do these things. So what I'm positing is say, no, it's interesting. I'll give you another example. Think about it. When the AI, the guys that won the Nobel Prize for proteins, they got on the way to proteins by first having the thing learn how to play games. And the thing that stunned the world was when first they trained the thing how to play Go, which was deemed to be the hardest game. And they trained it by looking at all the games that have been recorded over 3,000 years from the top humans who ever played Go. And sure enough, the machine learned how to beat the best human, on that. But then the guy said, yeah, but what if we don't learn from humans? So all they did was give it, they said, okay, I got 2 machines. I'm going to only give them a go board and the rules. And then I'm going to tell them, go play each other. And all you have to do is make sure every move is legal. And because it operates orders of magnitude faster than humans, in a matter of a couple of weeks, the thing plays more games than all the humans that have ever lived played. In doing so, it discovered new ways to play Go that humans had never thought of. And in fact, you know, Henry, when he was learning about this AI stuff, he studied that, and he was amazed because in one of those games, you know, the machine got to where it was called Move 37, you know, where all the people watching this thing looked at this thing in Move 37 and says, no one has ever made that move before. Nobody, no Go expert, no one had ever seen this move before. What's it doing? And of course, it went on to win the game. And now the world's best players go and play the machine to try to learn new ways to think about how to play Go. So here, what I'm positing is, let's just take the rule books that we've written down and not the application of the rule books as recorded by humans, and let it work on it that way, and therefore try to keep it to be truly neutral, very uniform. And then if it starts making mistakes, we can decide, well, what rule did we not have? It's also why this idea of grounding it in the doxa says, if there's a case that I don't understand, you know, then I should go down lower and try to figure out, what should I do? So these things that you have as a concern, you know, might be mediated, you know, by a polymathic machine that understands all the rule sets and the intersection of these rule sets. We talked a little bit about the biology and medicine example. I mean, the big problem with biology and medicine is it's so complicated that the doctors all have to become finer and finer specialists. But our body is one big system. And so now today you go to the doctor, you know, how many doctors you have to see for your problem? How many referrals do you get? All right. And whoever puts the picture back together. So in a sense, you know, we're Humpty and we've gotten broken down into eggshell parts, and we got a doc for every piece of the shell. But what does Humpty look like? And, you know, why did he break in the first place? These machines hold the promise in every discipline, including law, diplomacy, biology, medicine, engineering, of reintegrating all the things that humans have had to break into little pieces in order to understand or to try to operate. And that, I think, is one of its greatest gifts. But you have to realize how qualitatively different that is than having humans try to write the rules as programs, or have humans only learn from the best that humans have been able to do, because all of those mistakes, biases, etc., they all got baked into the ML. We might be able to avoid that if we come at this in a more pure way.
We have to cut it off here because I want to have Craig to have time to sign all your books, and there's so many people here. But your last point, Craig, reminds me of a Russian proverb, which is that it is a lot easier to make fish soup from an aquarium than an aquarium from fish soup. And I think that that's going to be one of our real challenges. Thank you very much. This was fantastic. Thank you.